Hi, I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on this idea of clauses. Our writing is full of clauses, but I don't think most of us consciously think about what types of clauses that we're using in every single sentence that we create. Like I mentioned above, a clause just means that it's a group of words that contains both a subject and a predicate. Again, this idea of a predicate just means a verb and maybe some other words, right? So potentially what that means is that a clause could be a complete sentence, but maybe it's not. So the idea is that recognition of what type of clause you have is going to help you avoid making a lot of errors in your writing. Realistically, a lot of the writing that I see, the errors that occur come, at least one of the reasons why they occur is because of this idea of not recognizing a clause correctly. It can lead to a lot of problems later. So I wanted to show you some examples to help you illustrate that. So like I mentioned above, and like the book says, there are two main types of clauses. One clause is called an independent clause, and all that means is it's a complete sentence on its own. Nothing needs to be added to it, and it can work perfectly fine as a sentence by itself. And that's what you want most of the time when you're writing. However, there are these other types of clauses that are called subordinate or subordinating clauses. And they're the ones that sometimes cause some problems, even though they're good to use. So I'll talk a little bit more about what that word subordinate or subordinating means in a few minutes here. But let's just look at a couple examples first. So I have a couple of sentences at the very top. The car had a flat tire. It sat in the parking lot. Right now, I have two independent clauses. Both of these are complete sentences, and they are perfectly fine as they are on their own. So if you were writing, a paragraph talking about your experience with a flat tire, this would be perfectly correct to do. But, something that you might notice, and again, maybe it's not a big problem to you, but these are two short sentences. So while this is correct, it might sound a little bit better and a little bit smoother for the writing if there was a way to connect these two ideas together so that you don't have these two short little choppy sentences, right? So one way that you might do this is by using what's called a subordinating conjunction. So let's break that down. We'll talk a little bit more about this in depth, but let's start with the word conjunction. Maybe you're familiar with this Schoolhouse Rock cartoon, Conjunction Junction. Conjunction Junction, what's your function? That one, right? If you remember back to watching this video when you were a kid, the image that we see on the screen in that cartoon is a bunch of trains, like these box cars on trains going by. And that's a really nice illustration of what a conjunction is. A conjunction is a connector word. Its job in a sentence is to connect things together. And that might be, just a couple of words. It might be a whole phrase, or it might be connecting two complete sentences together. They're pretty versatile, these conjunctions. The most common ones that I'm sure you're familiar with are these ones like and, but, or, these ones that we use constantly. Some of you probably learned there's a nice acronym, FANBOYS, that helps you remember all the most common conjunctions. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, right? So again, those are all conjunctions, and the ones that we use most commonly, I think. But there's another type of conjunction, and it's what's called a subordinate or subordinating conjunction. And these are examples of words like because, since, when, which, words like that, although. And again, if you're not sure what these are, quick Google search will give you a big list of what are called subordinating conjunctions. So why use these things? Again, they're connectors. And specifically what they do is connect two ideas together. So if we look at the example that I have in the second sentence, right? It's a variation of what we have in the first couple of sentences, right? So I use this word because, a subordinating conjunction. And what it's doing is it's connecting these two independent clauses or complete sentences together. Again, why might you do that? Because when I read it, you'll see it sounds a little bit smoother than having two short sentences, one right after the other. Because the car had a flat tire, it sat in the parking lot. Again, we're getting the same ideas across, but the only difference is we're using this word to connect those two ideas together so that we can have them in one complete sentence. And again, it's good to use these subordinating conjunctions when the two ideas are related, right? I wouldn't want to say something like, because the car had a flat tire, I ate a turkey sandwich for lunch. Like, it doesn't really work there, right? Again, this is an option that you have when you write, to throw in a subordinating conjunction to act as a connector so that you can make a smoother sounding sentence, right? And notice that while a lot of times you'll see these subordinating conjunctions at the beginning of the sentence, they can come in the middle too. So again, I just sort of rearranged these two independent clauses and connected them with this word because in the middle. The car sat in the parking lot because it had a flat tire. Still getting the same ideas across. I just put that subordinating conjunction in a different place, right? But that's it. We have these two separate ideas, and now we're just connecting them together because they are related, right? So, again, these subordinating conjunctions are really good to use and can make your writing a lot smoother. However, I sometimes see this causing problems, and it comes down to a problem with punctuation. So again, really, we need to unpack what this word subordinate or subordinating means, right? Maybe you've heard the word subordinate before. Like, if you have a subordinate, that means that there's someone who's below you in rank. Like, this idea of subordination talks about like an unequal distribution of power, right? So I could have a subordinate, somebody who's lower than me in rank, or I could be someone's subordinate, right? Or maybe you've heard the word insubordination. So that means when you go kind of beyond your place and do something that's bad, right? So again, it's sort of like rebelling or going above your station in your job or whatever it is, right? So when we're talking about subordinating conjunctions, these conjunctions are used when you're intentionally trying to create an unequal relationship in a sentence. What you're doing is you're making one part of the sentence depend on another part of the sentence in order to make sense, right? So again, let's kind of look at our second sentence here. Because the car had a flat tire, comma, it sat in the parking lot. When I add this because in here, it changes the power of these two sentences, right? Like in the sentences above, like we said, these are more equal because they're both independent clauses. The car had a flat tire, that can stand by itself, and it sat in the parking lot. It can stand by itself. But when I add this because in here, what I'm doing is making this part of the sentence depend on this second part in order to make sense. In our example that we have here, this second part, it's still an independent clause. It can still stand on its own. And again, as long as we've specified what this it was, right? You could have a sentence that says it sat in the parking lot. The same is not true now of this first part. And again, this is what I'm kind of illustrating here in this bottom example, right? Just listen to how it sounds, right? Because the car had a flat tire, you can tell even just by reading that it needs to be connected to something else. It doesn't work by itself. And it's really that because it's causing the problem. So what I see a lot is a situation like this. In our second example here, the way we have it punctuated is perfectly fine. Because most of the time you'll notice that when you have a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a sentence, what you'll want to do is connect that clause, that subordinating clause, to an independent clause. And you want to use a comma to do that. Why? Think about what a comma is meant to do. A comma shows a pause, but a continuation of the same sentence or thought, right? That's what a comma is showing when you use it. I'm just pausing for a second, but I'm going to continue on with this same idea, right? And that's what we have here. What we have below is something different, right? And again, this is something that I see students do a lot. They'll say to themselves, well, I have a subject here, the car. I have a predicate that contains a verb, had a flat tire. This is a sentence, so I'll put a period at the end, right? Here's the problem. When you have this word because, this subordinating conjunction at the beginning, like we said, you're creating a phrase or a clause that depends on something else. So what that means is you can't use a period here. We're kind of treating this clause as though it's independent when it's not, right? Because like we said, just if you read it, because the car had a flat tire, it doesn't work by itself. And when you use a period, you're sort of disconnecting it from this independent clause that it needs to be connected to, right? When you do this, when you put a period at the end of a subordinating clause, this is what leads to a sentence fragment. And fragments can happen for, more than one reason, but this is a really common reason that they happen. When you try to treat a subordinating clause as though it's independent. It's not, right? Because again, think about the difference between a period and a comma. A comma shows a pause, but a continuation in the same sentence. A period shows a stop. It's implying what comes before is a complete sentence or an independent clause. So again, it's like a misrepresentation of what's going on here, right? So while this second example is correct, since we used a comma, this example here that uses the period, this is a sentence fragment. Specifically, this is. Again, the second part is fine. It's a complete sentence. This one is not. So what that means is you just need to be really careful with your punctuation if you recognize that you're using a subordinating clause that has one of these subordinating conjunctions, right? So this, I think it happens most often when you use a subordinating clause at the beginning of the sentence, but this can also be a problem if you use a subordinating clause in the middle of a sentence. So look at this example that I included below. The car had a flat tire, which made me late for work. I see this type of error a lot too. Here we have this subordinating conjunction which in the middle, but again, it's causing a problem. This which made me late for work doesn't make sense by itself. It only makes sense if it's connected to this previous sentence. And again, this is a complete sentence right here. So, we've created a sentence fragment because we used a period here instead of a comma connecting these two ideas together. So again, the correct way to do it is below. use a comma to connect an independent clause to a subordinating one.